Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Mastering Mast Cell Activation Summit. I'm your co-host, Beth O'Hara of Mast Cell 360, and I am delighted and honored to have with us Dr. Roger Billica. And I know that you are in Colorado, near Loveland or in Loveland?
Fort Collins.
Fort Collins. And I met you through Dr. Neil Nathan. And because I was having a lot of trouble with EMF sensitivities, and I've done everything I could to mitigate my house, but I was still having trouble, and it was affecting me to travel and flying in airplanes. And I have to wear all this EMF shielded clothing, this hoodie tight around my face, and I look really weird, but I don't care because it helps my migraines from the EMFs. And Neil said, reach out to Roger. He has knows about some ways to mitigate EMFs that are really unique. And he said he knows his stuff and he really does his research. And he said, I trust Roger. And so I reached out and we started talking, and you educated me. And I know a lot about EMFs, but you shared some things with me that I didn't know at all. But the other things I know about you is, in addition to being an incredible physician, you were also the medical director of NASA's space program, and you have to clean me up if I get details wrong, but you were personal physician to Neil Armstrong when he went back into space, and you have studied just
that was John Glenn.
Oh, sorry, John Glenn, when he went back into space. And you have this tremendous history of both solid hard research and science, and then also bringing in things that I think of as energy medicine and functional medicine, but way beyond functional medicine. Any of those details that need to get cleaned up, because I'm just going off of my rough memory.
Well, we don't want to take too much time with this because we want to get into the subject, but I've always been a person who asks why or why not. And so even in medical school, I was involved with putting together a class called Alternative Approaches to Health and Healing. And I went into family medicine, got my MD, did family medicine. Then I joined the Air Force and did aerospace medicine, and then went to the NASA space program. And my official title was Chief of Medical Operations. But during the 90s, I was responsible for integrating with all the countries who would become our partners in the International Space Station, how, as an international medical responsible group, how are we going to practice medicine in space? And there were no standards, there were no rules, there was nothing. So with the Russians and the Japanese and the Europeans and the Canadians and us, we spent a lot of time working all that out. But what that did was expose me to different approaches, different ways of looking and problem solving, and different paradigms for health. And it exposed me, to frequency and electromagnetic therapies and homeopathy and herbal medicine and so on, and really opened my eyes. And at the same time, when John Glenn went back into space, he was in his 70s at the time. So it was billed as a flight to look at the parallels between space flight and aging. So I had several years of working with the National Institute of Aging on, what is aging and why does it happen and what do you do about it? So it all came together and really opened up a lot of thoughts and ideas, and has led me to this practice that I've been doing now for 23 years in Fort Collins, which is a functional based integrative practice that has turned out to just be quite the amazing journey. I learn every day. So it's been great.
Well, the conversations I've had with you have been just a joy, and you've taught me so much in that brief amount of time. So I'm very excited about what we're going to learn about EMFs, that I'm going to be beyond what most people have heard about EMFs. We're going to talk about some of the shielding options, which are very important and helpful. And then we are going to talk about some really revolutionary devices. These are not the stickers, the pennants, the harmonizing things that are making some people feel worse. And I'm not finding that they're having as good of an impact as we need. But we're going to talk about some devices, and I'm just going to go ahead and show people this device. It's been a game changer for me. There's a scalar energy device that does really work, and we have published studies on this. So I want people to stick around to hear about that, because it can really change people's lives, and it changed my life.
There's mine. Don't leave home without it.
I keep this sitting right on my laptop. And then when I walk away, I actually put my hair up and I clip it in my hair clip,
Oh
and it
my.
takes my migraines away. It feels wonderful. So I
Yes, it
can't wait to
does.
get the pendant and some of the other ones. But
Yeah, yeah.
well, let's start with some basics and background of EMFs. And I'm going to pull your slides up here.
Okay. So I started lecturing on electromagnetic radiation and the health effects on people, gosh, 10, 12 years ago. Of course, being at NASA, we had our own radiation team that monitored the astronauts in space and their exposures. So I've been aware of the potential harm and the potential dangers of electromagnetic radiation fields for some time. But I think it's only just recently that we're becoming more aware that this is a game changer. This is a big deal, and people need to be aware of it. Next.
And I just want to share, I mean, we're going to talk about what is EMFs. And then I want to share, Roger, about we have published studies on these affecting mast cell activation, especially in the brain.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go ahead and put up what this is. This is, it's a natural phenomena of how the world is made, and it's basically the flow of energy, and it's through free space, through the atmosphere, but also through material medium, including the human body. And it's both in the form of electrical and magnetic fields, and we find them in all sorts of things that you see, radio, et cetera. And what we know is there's variable sensitivity. Some people are exquisitely sensitive to electromagnetic radiation, and others they don't seem to be affected by it. So its effects on us, on humans, is variable. And there are helpful EMR frequencies, and there are damaging ones. So we really need to get educated on this. Next. Oh, you want to talk about some of the research? Yeah.
I'll bring it in a second, but I just want to share in terms of these varying sensitivity levels. So my husband, who is not very sensitive, sits in an office with the router, and it doesn't bother him at all. He can talk with a cell phone against his head. Now, I think there might be long-term effects, but I'm a person who, if the cell phone's by my head, or if I sit down at a laptop with Wi-Fi on, I have debilitating effects where I get full facial muscle spasms, and my legs will actually give out, Roger. I can't walk and I can't form words from the neural inflammation. So I know we're going to talk also in a bit here about why we have these different levels of sensitivities for people, some of our differences.
And it's also a matter of the exposure. I had a patient who was a computer expert, and he finally landed his dream job as the what's it called, the computer technology guy for a fairly large company. So he's responsible
Like a
for all.
CTO.
Yeah, and he showed up and said, I'm doing my job that I've always dreamed of, but I'm so tired and I can't get my brain to work and something's not right. And he walked in my office and he was wearing like 3 pagers and had his Bluetooth on and a couple cell phones stuck in pockets. And I said, well, where's your office? He says, it's in the computer room with all the servers and everything and my bank of computers. And I said, well, I tell you what, I said, let's take all the stuff off your body and attach it to a soft briefcase or pack or something so you can hear them if they go off, but they're not on you. And let's get them to move your office out of the computer room into a little office and let's see what happens. And that did it. He was fine. So he probably wasn't a super sensitive person, but he was being overwhelmed. So that's an example. And I just want to, people say, what's this electromagnetic thing all about? And a lot of people don't understand that the human body is biochemical. So there's enzymes and there's receptors and there's peptides and neurotransmitters and hormones and signal molecules. And they work through mostly, at least we think classically, a physical interface with receptors, like the old fashioned used to be when you went to a car. If you wanted to open the door, you actually had to physically stick the key in the door handle and turn it to unlock the car. Next. There we go. And what we're looking at here with EMR, it's like the clicker beeper we all use to open the cars. Now it's doing the exact same physical action on the door of the car, but it's doing through a frequency signal. So the body is electromagnetic, and the signals can actually create physical changes. And when I've actually had a doctor say to me, well, I don't really believe in this frequency stuff you're doing. And I'll say, well, that's fine. That's okay. No one's forcing you to, but I'm curious, in this day and age, how do you practice medicine without doing EEGs or EKGs or MRI scans? And they look at me funny and say, well, what are you talking about? And I said, well, what are you talking about? These are frequency measures. You're measuring electrical activity. You're measuring, a magnetic resonance image. You're looking at tissue frequencies. So since you told me you don't believe in that, I assume you don't order any of those tests. And of course, now their head's hurting. But the body is electromagnetic, and we actually understand that the body actually works as semiconductors, a semiconductor network. And here's where we'll see later, I don't know if we'll have time to get into details, but where the scalar fields come in. But your body stores current, it stores charges, it stores vibrational information. We actually now know that there's a fourth phase of water that's not the vapor, the solid, and the liquid. It's like this jello matrix that's a single or a couple molecules thick that's on the surface of things, and it acts as a semiconductor and stores information. It's fascinating. So, anything that's going to affect this body electromagnetic field is going to have a significant effect, potentially negative, possibly positive, but it's a big deal. Okay. So, this is a chart that's out there. It just shows all the range of electromagnetic radiation that we get exposed to constantly every day. And you can see this, this whole range from power and I like it. It says telephony, radio frequencies, microwaves, infrared, UV, X-rays, gamma radiation. So it's overwhelming, the exposure nowadays. Next.
Can you just talk briefly about something that most people never think about, and I didn't think about until recently, which was FM and AM radio towers?
Yes. So the radio frequencies are in that low energy range. So that means it's, interestingly, how it'll penetrate and affect tissues. And just like power lines, these radio towers, unlike the 5G microwave and stuff, they're in different ranges, but they do penetrate, and they can have an effect depending on how sensitive the person is.
And I just want to share a resource for people. And if you don't have time to write this down, I'll have it over to our Summit resources page at masshealth360.com/summit. But it's antennasearch.com, and you can see how many cell phone and FM and AM towers are around any location. And I use that when I'm searching for an Airbnb, or if I'm looking, any place to travel or a hotel or something. I try to find something with lower number of towers.
And nowadays, every neighborhood, it seems like, has had cable laid in the front yards or backyards that are the networks and the, we are constantly bombarded and constantly surrounded.
And hang in here, because there's a lot we can do, and it doesn't have to be that hard.
Don't despair. Yes. So this is a great quote from Arthur Furstenberg, who wrote The Invisible Rainbow, one of the books I recommend later. And I just thought it was a mind-catching quote here. So bear with me, I'll read it to you. Today, when million-volt power lines course through the countryside, 12,000-volt lines divide every neighborhood, and sets of 30-ampere circuit breakers watch over every home, we tend to forget what the natural situation really is. Not since the presidency of James Polk, so in the 1800s, have our cells, like puppets on invisible strings, been given a second's rest from the electric vibrations. The sudden overwhelming of Earth's own nurturing fields during the first few decades of technology free-for-all had a dramatic impact on the very character of life. It's not been since the mid to late 1800s that people have lived in our country with just purely natural electromagnetic radiation from Schumann's, from the earth itself. They started stringing, the telegraph wire, and then here comes, radio and television, and then here comes radar. And then here comes computers and televisions and all these things. And then in the last couple of decades, of course, there has just been a wild explosion with the internet and the smartphones and everything else. So we are no longer living in a natural, healthy electromagnetic environment, and we need to take care of ourselves for that.
And some people, Dr. Roger, may not be familiar with the Earth's healing magnetic fields, the nurturing fields that Arthur Furstenberg mentions here, or what Schumann resonance is. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's
we actually have a slide coming up that addresses
good.
that.
Okay, great. Well, let's go into this one.
Okay, so to help people understand, let's look at this list of is this sensitivity, is this illness? That becomes let's just go ahead and throw it all up there. People can be looking at that. But I mean, look at this list, folks. This is the list that everybody struggles with, and everybody goes to their family practice doctor regularly. If you're a healthcare provider, how often I'm not sleeping well, I'm tired, I have headaches, I have brain fog, I feel anxious and depressed, my heart's beating funny, neuropathy, ringing in the ears, common symptoms. Now, there's other things that could cause it, absolutely. So you need a good diagnostician, but as you're going through the list of what could be going on, you absolutely need to think of electromagnetic radiation sensitivity.
And this is part of our stabilization step, Dr. Roger. And I know it's a big part of what you guys do is that we've got to get these environmental triggers off. And it's not just chemicals or mold toxins. Those are really important. But it's also these EMFs because of the effects they have. And a lot of people stop at like, I have insomnia and my melatonin is low, or my cortisol goes up at night. And so I'm going to tinker with that with supplements, which is good and helpful. But we have to ask why. Why is that happening? Because that's not natural. That's not normal.
Well, again, there are some people who are naturally more EMR sensitive, but when these things become issues like this, you're right, there absolutely is going to be some underlying thing. And I think we have a slide on that coming up too.
And I think most people hear EMFs, but can you define EMRs for people?
Well, it's just another way of saying that. I mean, electromagnetic frequencies, I just like the term radiation, electromagnetic radiation. We're really talking the same language there, but it's, I think, more attention getting and sounds more clinical if you're talking electromagnetic radiation. I think that just gets better attention.
And I like how you call it toxicity, because this differentiates between the Earth has an electromagnetic pulse, and that we're going to talk about that healing pulse, but that's healing, not toxic. And there's these different waves you'll talk about.
And I mean, I use frequency microcurrent to solve all sorts of things. We have pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. So there are ways to use frequencies, EMF, and I believe scalar fields for healing and for health support. So let's not assign that this is good or bad. Let's just be aware of what this is and that it can have effects that are deleterious to our health. So we need to address that. So here's some actual, quote, diseases as opposed to toxicity that have been linked to electromagnetic radiation effects. So decreased production of certain hormones, thyroid, certain tumors, certainly breast tumors, breast cancer. For that reason, I guess this is okay to say, I'm not a fan of mammography. I would much rather people do thermography, do a heat temperature sensitive scan, because there is evidence out of Europe that basically, mashing the breast tissue and radiating it is not particularly a good thing to do to it.
I'm so grateful you said that, because that's a huge question that people come in with, and it's a sensitive topic and it's a very political topic.
Yeah. And then infertility, which is on the rise, and particularly male infertility, and then the autism spectrum disorders. And I'm sure there's more, but these actually have published research behind them, so we can list these in confidence. Okay. So here's some of the things you talked about. Why? Let's go ahead and put all this list up. Why are some people more sensitive to EMR than others. And here we mentioned individual variability. There are some genetic variations in this calcium channel gene that can make people more susceptible to it. The mast cell activation syndrome, one of your areas of expertise. I noticed that when people come in with infections like Lyme and Bartonella, Babesia, others, mold toxicity, heavy metal toxicity, that those individuals are almost universally sensitized or more sensitive to EMR. And it's not on the list, but I would add to this now COVID long haul syndrome. And I've known
Yes.
people who are dealing with COVID long haul, which is huge in numbers, are also more EMR sensitive. So there are things, if you weren't before and you are now sensitive, there's a chance you've got something like this going on that needs to be addressed.
And I can also add to this a couple things, craniosacral instability and particularly Chiari malformation. So that's what happens for me, for anybody who's not familiar with what that is, the brainstem sits down in the hole of the skull and there's not good flow of the cerebrospinal fluid. And so when I get, and this ties in with the studies I mentioned with mast cell activation syndrome, they're published studies, and I'll link to them in our resources page. And that's mastcell360.com/summit. And I've got published studies there about how EMFs directly contribute to mast cell degranulation. And then Dr. Theo Harides in his talk is going to talk about an unpublished study he did in rats and demonstrated that EMFs just from a computer speaker triggered mast cell degranulation in their brains. And so then we get swelling from that inflammation, and that swelling can trigger a lot of symptoms, migraines. It can affect the pineal gland, the pituitary gland that are involved in hormone regulation and sleep cycles. And this is where we get these downstream effects. And Lyme and Bartonella so much affect the nervous system, make them more sensitive. Mold toxicity affects the nervous system greatly. And they all affect these calcium channels, which I'd love for you to explain a little bit more, Dr. Roger. And then heavy metals are going to have this biochemical effect when they're in our bodies. They're going to, just like if you put a fork in a microwave, that's not a good thing to do. And I can also add to this the orthodontics, since I had to do this to open my airway more because of hypermobility and my dental arch had really collapsed and I wasn't breathing well. But I've got metal in my mouth, and that makes me that I noticed an uptick in my EMF sensitivities when I got the orthodontics.
Yeah, you're carrying around an antenna in your mouth now.
Exactly. Yeah. Can you just tell people a little more about the CACNA1C genetic variants and that?
Well, this is a gene that has a lot to do with these calcium activation channels. And when a signal reaches the cell and it wants to create an action in the cell, whether it's something to do with the cell's function, or whether it's something to do with information that needs to go in or out of the cell, one of the ways that happens is there's these gateways that when they're activated, they open up and they allow a flow of calcium ions into the cell. And it's excitatory, it's activating, it's stimulating. And you need that, it's real important. But if it's done too much, it can result in overactivation, overexcitation. So it's the cause of various, pain syndromes and headache syndromes and neurologic disorders and seizure disorders, and in some cases autoimmune. And it's connected to your histamine world as well, because that's another activation signal. And this particular gene particularly relates to the heart and the brain and nervous system. And so you'll see things like, heart arrhythmias, heart sensitivities. You'll see issues. They're saying they see a lot of issues with memory and fear and bipolar and psychiatric things. And so if it's already can do that, and then you stimulate it with radiation and activate it even more, you can make these things worse. And so what we need to understand, really the basic answer to all of this, is when it comes to whether it's biochemistry or electromagnetism, it's all about the movement of electrons. And so that's the common denominator, and that's where you get into, how the body actually functions electromagnetically and chemically. And so anything that alters that flow of electrons or ions, minerals with charges and things, is going to have an effect. Could be positive, could be negative, but it's so these are the people who are gluten sensitive and glutamate sensitive, because those glutamate channels are calcium channels, and they're very excitatory. So why, when somebody eats glutamate, MSG or gluten or something, they get a headache or they get twitches or tics or something like that. But the same thing can happen with infections. The toxins produced by these infections are neuroexcitatory. So just about everything like this that is inflammatory, excitatory, often has to do with these calcium channel activation. And this is one reason why I don't promote taking extra calcium if you have these sorts of conditions that are excitatory, inflammatory, pain. Calcium's not your friend. And people get plenty of calcium through a typical diet and really don't need to supplement calcium. And they certainly don't need to supplement calcium for bone loss. That's not the problem with bone loss, but that's a whole nother lecture.
We have a whole lecture on osteoporosis and bone loss and the most important nutrients, and we blessed that myth in there.
And it's not due to low calcium. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so any of these things, I mean, heavy metals block the normal electrical charge that resides on the surface of the membranes. Heavy metals are lipophilic, so they bind to the membranes. They have their own positive charges, so they basically short out the battery on the surface of the cells, and the cells don't work properly anymore. So anyway, it's a very real thing, and and a lot of people are struggling with these things.
And what I heard you say is that some people have the genetic variants like I do. I have everything on this list. My Lyme and Bartonella are in remission, fortunately, but I've had everything on this list. But some people, and I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of genetic reports as well and correlated with EMF sensitivity. So I find that genetic variant does increase susceptibility to EMF sensitivity or toxicity. But even without that genetic variant, these other conditions can epigenetically change the expression of that gene and impact its functioning, even without the genetic variants. It's just those of us with the genetic variants, even after we handle these secondary issues, may have to be a little more careful than other people long term.
That's true, Beth. But we haven't had a chance to talk about this. So, and we need to keep moving. But I'm here to tell you that you do not have to be satisfied with Lyme and Bartonella being in remission. You can absolutely eradicate and remove Lyme and Bartonella and get rid of them. And you can address mold toxicity, and you can get rid of heavy metals. So you don't, I had a group call me the other day, say, we're putting together a support group for people to manage chronic Lyme. And I said, well, wouldn't you rather just get rid of it?
Yeah.
And they hadn't heard that that's possible, but it absolutely is.
And I'm with you. I just don't know yet if it's eradicated or if it's still there, and I'm going to have to take that step.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm with you. We can completely get rid of it. All right.
Let's just put this list up. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it, but it just shows you all the things that are in our daily lives that are giving us various forms of electromagnetic radiation.
Whoops. I went too fast. There we go.
Yeah. So I don't think we need to go through this. They can just take a quick look at it and let's move on here, being respectful of your time. So let's go on to the next one. All right, so here's what you were talking about. When was the last time we lived in a natural EMR? We talked about that, the 1800s. Is there healthy natural EMR? Yes, there is. And probably one of the most important ones is the Schumann frequency. And it is generated because the Earth is a globe within spheres. So our atmosphere forms layers and circles around our globe. And anytime you have spheres within spheres, you create electromagnetic fields. you create a movement. That's where lightning comes from and things like that. So when an Austrian physicist named Schumann proposed and measured by calculating that the Earth has a pulse, and it was named the Schumann frequency. And when we finally got into space and turned our electronic measuring back on the Earth and measured that electromagnetic pulse, it matched the Schumann frequency, which is 7.83, which is interestingly very close to the brain frequency for GABA, which is the brain chemical of a relaxed, calm mind and being able to sleep. So I don't find that surprising at all. And so this is where you can benefit from grounding or earthing. There is a product, and I list their book in our resources here towards the end, but there is a product called frequency specific microcurrent, which is an FDA certified therapy device using frequencies, and you can actually generate the Schumann frequency with this device and treat yourself. And I find that people who have dissociative personality disorders, where they feel like they're outside their body, if you treat them with the Schumann frequency, they'll get back in their body. And
I
when
I run it on mine. Here's my machine right here.
there you go. And when I was with NASA, we had many meetings about this, and we realized, hey, when we send the crews outside the Earth's atmosphere to Mars or wherever, we better have a Schumann frequency generator on board, or they're not going to do well. When they did studies where they took volunteer college students and put them in a living quarters underground and put the Faraday cages around it so no frequencies could get in their living quarters, they did
including
not
the Earth's healing frequencies. So they
they
were mimicking what going into space would work.
Yeah, they did not do well at all, which is why I don't recommend Faraday cages. So, there are some shielding where people go to an extreme where they're actually sleeping in a Faraday cage or something. And I'm just not sure that's a good idea, because you're blocking out the Schumanns and some other frequencies, some 40 hertz frequencies from the Earth, the gamma frequency. So
that's such an interesting idea. What about people who live in really dense city areas like LA?
well, they could put shielding up on their walls, perhaps.
Or if they're what if they're in a high-rise apartment building or something?
Yeah, I mean, there are grounding mats that you can sleep on.
I have a grounding mat under my feet right now.
Yeah,
I'll
so
link
there
to
are
some of
things like
those.
that you can do, but to totally block you off from all EMR, you're going to miss the good stuff too. And we need the Schumann frequency. We have grown and developed and evolved in this Earth's geomagnetic field, and to take us out of that, the human organism does not do well.
That makes so much sense. I never thought of this. And, I used to live downtown, not downtown, but really close to downtown. And there were houses packed kind of closely in. And then it took us a while. We had to work on it towards us for a few years, but 3.5 years ago, we moved out the outskirts of the city. There's a nature preserve on this side. There's an empty lot on this side of me. And I go out by that nature preserve every morning and spend about an hour with my feet on the ground back there.
There you go.
And then once a week, there's an old growth forest. It's about an hour and a half drive, so it's a little bit of work to get there. And I looked it up on Antenna Search, and there were 3 antennas in a 3-mile radius, which is about as low as you can get out here. And I go out there and I try to spend about 2 hours, and it's so healing.
It's one of the reasons, and people don't hate me for this, but one of the reasons we moved out of the Houston, Texas area when we had a child is because you don't dare walk barefoot in your yards out there because of the fire ants. And it's just like, I'm not raising a family where you can't walk around barefoot in your yard. So, but the Schumann's pretty important. And if you do have a smart meter against one wall, there's some shielding you can get to just kind of block that broadcasting energy. If you've got a neighbor in an apartment and they have things on their walls next to you, you could shield that area of your wall. But I would not support totally surrounding yourself in a Faraday cage. So let's look at some of the things that we can do.
So I know we're going to break this down to 3 categories. So 1 is reducing exposure, just so people can kind of lump it in their mind. 1, reducing exposure. 2 is shielding. And then 3 is the scalar energy devices, which I had never heard of until I talked to you, but it's been a game changer to bring those in. So I just want to let people know what to hang in here for.
Yeah. And there's actually even one more category that I think, go ahead and populate the slide, please. So minimize exposure, and we're going to go into more details in a minute, but, be able to turn off your Wi-Fi at night or when you're not using it, and don't put your phone next to your bed or up against your head. But you can also, there are Stetzer meters and Stetzer filters where you can measure your home and find out which of the outlets, where in your home is dirty electricity being generated from the wiring of your house, and you can measure it. And there are Stetzer filters that you can place at key spots that'll block that dirty electricity. So that's one. And then there's the product. I believe these folks are a sponsor of the.
Yeah,
of the
they really donated to help us get this out for people to free.
So we'll show some of their. They have technology to block or filter the EMR, but of course, when you do that, the devices, don't work if you shut off the EMR. So then the last one here is this technology out of Spain called Pranan, and it neutralizes or counteracts the exposure without altering the EMF. It's actually creating a whole different energy field called scalar energy, which is not electromagnetic frequency. It's a totally different phenomena. It was first measured by Tesla. In fact, some people call it Tesla field, some people call it 0 point, but it's a fascinating energy that is the energy of the universe. It actually moves through the 4th dimension of time. It's everywhere simultaneously, and it explains how quantum physics can exist. So it's fascinating, and there's emerging information on it, and it turns out there are ways to create a scalar energy field. And what it turns out is the scalar energy is much, much stronger than the EMF. So if you protect yourself with the scalar field, the EMF is not strong enough to harm you. It doesn't block the EMF, it doesn't stop the EMF, it doesn't change the EMF, but it protects you. And there's good research on that. So let's look at some of these. So things to do to mitigate cell phone. Don't charge it near your bed. I would say don't have it near your bed at night. Put it on airplane mode. I think there's more here. Let's keep going. Don't carry it on your body. Like I told that guy, use an EMF shield on the phone. Don't put it to your head. Use the speaker phone or earbuds. Don't use the Bluetooth, and avoid wired earphones or earbuds. So really practical stuff. Next. I'm going fast because we're running out of time here.
I know, but we'll hit it.
So on your laptop, don't put it on your lap. Avoid Wi-Fi if possible. And what's not on our list, keep going, but you can get these very stylish blue blocker glasses to wear. I'm joking, of course, about them being stylish.
They look stylish on you, Roger.
Well, thank you. But when you're working on your phone or working on your laptop, it's putting out this blue wave energy that actually damages retina. I think it contributes to macular degeneration, and it's a direct pathway into your brain. So if you're going to be spending a lot of time on computers and things, I think you need to get some blue blocker glasses of some sort. You can probably find some that look nicer than this. This is a very cheap pair, but it works.
I have a link to one we'll put in that has a gasket that really goes all the way around, so you don't get anything on the side. So I'll put that in for people too.
Yeah, and try and use hardwired as much as possible as opposed to. And then
I'll give people my setup with my keyboard, my mouse, and stuff.
Okay. So let's see what else. So for other devices, beware of microwaves. Don't stand near high-powered things that are putting out a lot of energy. Don't use Bluetooth or wireless on your body. Keep your tablets and your phone on airplane mode when you're not using it.
And how far away from the microwave, the blender, the refrigerator?
When we were at NASA, we brought in our own staff that looks at all of this, and they actually looked at the microwaves that they were going to put on the shuttle and the space station and measured the field, and the shielding on it was pretty good. But I've never personally measured the microwave radiation from a standard in-home microwave. And so that's a deficit in my knowledge. Maybe
I measured it with my meter. No, it's a Cornet meter. So it's nothing like what you guys had at NASA.
Yeah.
But I had to get 20 feet away from my microwave.
Holy smokes.
So about 10 feet away, it really dropped off. But what I do is I go to the opposite corner of the house, and it's not in my kitchen. My utility room's in the other corner of the house from my office, and I keep it on top of the dryer in the utility room.
Well, I've never really looked at it personally, although I should know this, because in my household, we hardly ever use the microwave because of what it does to the food.
We have to a lot here with the histamine intolerances, so people have to freeze their leftovers.
Yeah, but I mean, we go through the old trouble of putting the leftovers in a pot, adding some water, and reheating them on the stove.
Yeah, that's a nice way to do it.
So we're just not microwave users in my household for the reasons of EMR, but even more so, it denatures the proteins. It damages the food. I don't want to eat that food.
So people are going to do it. They need to do it real gentle, but much better would be in a toaster oven or with some hot water, things like that.
Yeah. I'm all about leftovers. I'm a big leftover fan, but not microwaves. All right, and then here's some other things, just in broad. So if you have a smart meter, you may want to put some sort of shielding between you and the smart meter. I don't know how that might affect its effectiveness. We got our smart meter. In fact, when they came around, we refused to have it put on our house. And so we pay the extra fee every month to have someone come read our meter. Some places won't let you do that now, I know. Be careful about power lines. So when you're buying a house, I mean, you really need to look at this whole environment about where you live. Where's the fuse box? If you're in an apartment or condo, what's on the neighbor's walls next to you? So you really need to be smart about this, and better to avoid being in those situations if at all possible.
And Shield Your Body has a remote consultant that will help people with this. And we'll give a link to how people can find out about that too.
Excellent.
All right, let me get to our next one.
And there are EMF meters, trimeters, and others that you can go around and measure your environment and your home.
I'll put this one down.
Yeah.
And we've got instructions on using it too.
Good. All right, so here's some books I recommend. They're there in the presentation for you to come back and look at, but let's keep moving here. These are all fascinating books.
I'll link to those. All these links I'll have up for people.
Here is the link to the Stetzer Electric Company that we just had, where you can look at, for where there's dirty electric fields and filter those, okay?
Okay.
And then here's the Shield Your Body that has a phone pouch for shielding the phone. They also have...
I just want to tell people, if you use that, the gold side is the blocking side. So don't ever turn it so that the non-shielded side is towards you, because it's going to bounce off of that shielded gold side and amplify it back towards you. So you got to be really careful to keep it oriented away, but don't point it at other people either.
That sounds like very important advice. Yes.
And I love these. I use these all the time.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about this?
Sure. This is an air tube headset. So it's a way to jam a headset. There's a microphone in it. Comes with different sizes for those of us with little bitty ear holes. And there's no wire in it. So wires in the earbuds will transmit the EMF up to your brain. There's no wire in it. And if you do have like an over the ear, we didn't get the picture in here, but if you have over the head headphones you really love, they make a filter device that you can put on the end, and I'll link to that one too.
So very valuable company, very useful, very important technology to help protect you.
And then let's get into these scalar devices. I'm so excited
Yeah.
about this.
So like I said, this is out of Spain, and they're just now becoming available in the United States. It has some fascinating research on them. I've already talked about briefly how the scalar field works. So they're totally passive devices, and most of them are quite small, but they also have larger ones that can actually protect areas in your house. So it kind of creates a dome of a scalar field around. I think they go out about 60 feet in each direction. So, you know, we have this in our office and in our home. And then when I leave, you know, I just put one of these in my pocket. No power, no batteries, no maintenance, because they're just passively creating this scalar field. And that's their technology. I know a little bit about it, but not enough to explain exactly how it works. But I know that's what it's doing. So there's 6. There's the little pocket device I just showed you. There's the biospace tower for rooms and houses and things that I just showed you. And there's ones to go on your phone. And again, these do not block the EMF. They do not change it, filter it. The phones still work. What it's doing is protecting you from the EMF that's occurring. This is a brand new one that's just coming out on travel. That's for use if you're riding in electric cars, airplanes, going up in altitude, these sorts of things. And then they also have a pendant and a necklace jewel that you could wear around your neck. So those are currently what we have available. They all work the same way. And I think you told one story. I took this to a conference on frequency medicine where I was speaking a few months ago, and I brought samples to show people, and of course people wanted to buy them. But one of the ladies bought I don't know if it was the pendant or the jewel, but the next morning she comes running up to me and said, "I've got to tell you, I put that on, and for the first time in several years, my constant dizziness went away, just gone." And she was so excited. And I said, well, that tells you that dizziness was at least in part caused by your sensitivity to EMR.
Well,
So we get stories like that.
I always try everything before we try it in the clinic, and then before we talk about it to our larger community. And I went ahead and got one of these because I had a trip. This is the pocket one, because I had a trip coming up, and this is around the time we connected, Roger. And I am so allergic and sensitive to mold. And Airbnbs, I either was having to choose to get one out of the city in a low EMF area, but they consistently had mold, and I was getting sicker and sicker. And we traveled to North Carolina to see my husband's grandchildren. So that's not an option for me to not go. I had to find a way. And then I said, well, we're going to have to stay in a new build. But the only new builds I could find were down in the city where there's high EMFs there at Charlotte. And so we did get the new build, and I said, well, I'll just deal with the neurological effects. And that's when I was talking to Neil, and he said, you've got to talk to my friend, Dr. Roger, about EMFs. And so I got this device, and I was having migraines when we came in from the EMFs, and there was a transformer on one side of this townhome. So I slept in the opposite area, but still bothering me. So what I did was I ended up pulling my hair up in a clip like this and sticking it in the clip. And even doing it right now, oh, it feels so good. My head feels so good putting it right there. So I'm going to get this jewel necklace, and then I'm going to wrap it around a hair clip. And so I kept it clipped in all the time. And then when I slept, I slid it in my pillowcase. And I did fine. I did okay in that space. And it was so wonderful, Roger. It was just wonderful to get to have that experience and get to not feel so sick.
The owner of the frequency microcurrent that I just absolutely adore, both the microcurrent and the owner, she heard me lecture at this frequency conference, and we were sitting at the table, and she looked at me and with great skepticism said, so those things really work? Because I guess she has herself personally tried multiple types. And I said, well, here, I saved one for you. I'm giving this to you. And she held it in her hands, and right away her eyes got big, and she looked at me and says, this is doing something. So it's very different. It's
And I'm skeptical
not,
too. I
yeah,
roll my eyes at things all the
yeah,
time, and I don't take anybody's word for it, but I trust Neil, and Neil said he trusted you. So I was going to
yes,
try it. So we made this available for people, and we have a discount for people. It's just short term through the end of the summit, but it's at masslaw360.com/Pranan. You can get a discount there if you want to pick one of these up. I'm getting the travel and the jewel, and then I'm going to get the big one for our house. And even if you can't get them all at once, you can at least, I would just start with one and see how it works for you. And then if it works well, then you can pick up the rest of what you need. But it was a game changer for me, Roger, and I'm so excited to share it with our community.
excellent. Well, let's bring this talk home before everybody. So I want to just real quick tell you this story about a little 14-year-old boy who had been previously healthy. Keep going. And when he turned 14, right after his birthday, he started getting mood swings, and then turned into hallucinations and anxiety. They diagnosed him as, some kind of psychosis. They went everywhere. They went to all the big fancy clinics and did all the tests. They tried him on all these different drugs and medicines. Nothing worked, and he was all drugged up. And they came to see me out of desperation. And I said, okay, well, this is probably Lyme or mold or gluten or something. And I tested all of that and did not find anything. And so I remember sitting here in my office, and I said, there's got to be something. What changed? What did you do? Did you travel? I thought maybe they painted the room. They said they let him redecorate his room for his 14th birthday. Well, what did you do? Thinking maybe they used toxic paint or something. And he said, well, not much, but we let him move his bed to a different space in the bedroom. And I went, aha. And I gave him the trimeter to take home and measure the bedroom. And sure enough, where he moved the head of the bed was right behind that was where all the electrical wiring and major electrical stuff went up and down the wall. And when you check it with the meter, there was this really strong magnetic field being projected from the wall that came out about 3 feet. And so every night when he lay down in his bed, he's putting his head in this magnetic field. And so I said, move the bed, put it back where it was. It took about 2 weeks, and he was completely back to normal. So, you got to think about EMR. And that's what this chart's really saying. This is my, functional medicine when I'm teaching that. But basically, to the left of the screen is the -10, which is unhealthy. And to the right is +10, which is optimal health, optimal lifespan, health span, brain span. On the top are external factors that can be bad or good that affect your health. And that includes electromagnetic radiation, along with, organisms and food and environmental toxins and mold and fungus. These are all things you can test for and treat. And at the bottom of the scale are internal processes that happen, immune, digestion, endocrine, methylation, mitochondrial detox, et cetera. And you can measure these and see whether they're working well or not. And basically, the functional model is to fix this by avoiding or getting rid of the bad stuff and adding the good stuff and moving the scale from left to right. And that's how I think of and how I practice functional medicine. But I just want to make the point that very much on this list up top of things that need to be looked at and affect your health is electromagnetic radiation. So let's go on to I think the last one. The bottom line here is our environment now is let's just keep going, is full of saturation of toxins, all these things in the bed, including EMR, more so than ever before. Earlier in life, it's so deep that a lot of times our old traditional therapies aren't working anymore. And this exposure now is causing just metabolic wide chaos in people. And so I just want to make the plea here in closing to make sure when you're looking at everything else that you also address electromagnetic radiation and make it part of your comprehensive program for helping people be healthy, and yourself, of course, too. And And that's it. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share all this. I hope
Oh,
it's helpful for folks.
I'm so grateful. It's huge, Roger. And I hear so often people say, one, this is the area people are the most overwhelmed and have the most trouble addressing because they feel like it's impossible. They even will do mold remediation, which is so challenging, often before the EMF mitigation. So I just want to remind people your major messages here, which are just reduce the exposures. It's not that hard. I've done it. And my husband is a high level IT consultant. And we have all kinds of technology in our house, but we found ways to hardwire and keep the levels low in the house while he still had access to what he wanted to work with. So lower the exposure, use shielding, and then the Scalar energy devices are just huge and a game changer for people. And so this one, this little pocket one isn't too much. The iPhone one is the least expensive, the phone one there. And so I didn't mean like an iPhone, but I mean the phone one is the least expensive. And check it out and see if it's right for you, because it can really make a difference in your mast cell activation syndrome to lower that inflammation.
And other stuff as well. People wonder, if you're engaged in this kind of practice, we're just being overwhelmed with parasites now. What's up with all the parasites? The mold, why is the mold so toxic now? Why has Lyme become so prevalent? And, there's only a few answers. And one is, I think, because, of all the toxins that are out there affecting us in our immune system, but also I think the change in the electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic radiation environment is having an effect on all these pathogens as
That's
well as
right.
us.
And
So
mitigating this can make it reduce our sensitivities overall, make it easier to detox mold, make it easier to address Lyme. And I find people start spontaneously when we do those things. Just the EMF mitigation, mitigating as many toxic chemicals as we can, and addressing mold. People often clear parasites on their own, not always,
yes.
but often they just start clearing on their own. Our bodies just kick in that natural healing process.
So you don't wait. You don't say, well, I'll treat my Lyme first, or I'll get rid of the mold first, or I'll detox the heavy metals first, and then we'll deal with the EMR. It's like, no, you gotta do it comprehensively if you want those things to work. Yeah.
I just want to thank you, Roger, for your service in the world, for all you do for people. It's tremendous. And for this talk, but also I want to let people know if they're looking for a practitioner. I know you and your brother, William Billica, have a phenomenal practice. How can they find you?
Our website is www.trilifehealth, TRI lifehealth.com. The tri stands for spirit, soul, body. So trilifehealth.com.
Thank you so much, Roger.
Thank you for the opportunity.